A journey began with love and hope, a whirlwind romance that promised a lifetime of happiness. But beneath the glittering surface of marriage and comfort lay a painful truth. Love alone cannot shield us from betrayal. As Nicole navigates the storms of deceit, hardship, and heartbreak, she uncovers a deeper strength within herself, a resilience born of pain and a wisdom forged through adversity. One quiet Friday evening, Nicole sat curled on her sofa, watching her favorite soap opera flicker across the television screen. The scene before her showed a romantic couple locked in a tender embrace. As the actor leaned in, his voice low and seductive, whispering promises against the actress's lips before kissing her with unrestrained passion, Nicole felt a familiar chill of loneliness creeping over her. A sharp longing stirred in her chest, a thirst for intimacy that the television could only mock, never satisfy. Her eyes stayed on the screen, but her mind drifted. How long had it been since she had felt a touch like that? Being alone in this quiet house made the emptiness feel heavier, more unbearable. The fantasy world before her seemed so close, yet impossibly far. Desire curled inside her like a restless wind. Just then, her mobile phone rang, jolting her from her reverie. She glanced at the screen. It was Leroy, her husband, calling from Jamaica. A soft smile touched her lips. Jamaica, the place where fate had first entwined their lives 3 years ago when she had gone on holiday in search of escape and adventure. She hadn't expected to meet anyone like Leroy, a man whose charm and warmth had swept her off her feet in a dizzying courtship that turned into marriage just a year later. Now they lived apart more often than not, with Nicole visiting him only twice a year. Their love was tested by distance and longing, stitched together by promises made over the phone and memories of stolen moments in the Caribbean sun. As the phone buzzed insistently in her hand, she hesitated, torn between the romance flickering on the screen and the man she longed for, waiting on the other end of the line. With a soft sigh, she answered. "Babes," came Leroy's voice, rich with excitement, crackling softly through the line. "My precious wife, I have good news." Nicole straightened on the sofa, heart quickening. "Leroy, what is it?" she asked, her crisp British accent laced with curiosity and hope. "They've granted me the visa," he announced joyfully. For a heartbeat, silence filled the room as the words sank in. Then Nicole gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. After 6 long months of waiting, months filled with paperwork, uncertainty, and whispered prayers, their application for the spouse visa had finally been approved. Her heart swelled with relief and joy. A thrill of excitement coursed through her body, lifting the heavy veil of loneliness that had clung to her for so long. "Lord, I thank you," she whispered with heartfelt gratitude, her eyes glistening. Leroy chuckled softly on the other end. "See? I told you everything would work out, babes." A smile broke across Nicole's face, radiant and uncontainable. The thought of Leroy finally joining her in England, of ending the long stretches of separation, of waking up beside him every morning, it felt like the answer to every silent wish she'd made in the quiet of her empty house. "Leroy, this is the best news I've had in forever. When are you coming?" she asked, her voice trembling with joy. "As soon as you buy the ticket, my love, I'll be there. Then we can finally be together. For good." Nicole closed her eyes, letting the joy sink deeper. The loneliness that haunted her quiet evenings, the coldness of the empty side of the bed soon, all of that would be gone. "I can't wait," she breathed. "Neither can I. No more distance, no more goodbyes," Leroy said gently. Within 2 weeks, Leroy arrived in London, and from that moment on, he and Nicole were inseparable. The joy of finally having him by her side filled every corner of her life. For so long she had dreamed of this day, and now it was real. Up to that point, Nicole had almost entirely financed their relationship. She had paid for the wedding, covered the costly spousal visa application, booked his flight, and sent him money countless times during their years apart. As a manager at a private building society, Nicole earned a substantial salary that allowed her not only to provide for herself, but also to ensure Leroy's every comfort. She wanted him to have the best and spared no expense to make it so. Leroy arrived with no career prospects of his own, but Nicole wouldn't allow that to continue. Determined to see him succeed, she pushed him, at her own expense, to pursue studies to become a physical education teacher. She covered his tuition, bought his course materials, and encouraged him through every late night and early morning. Slowly but surely, he transformed. Eventually, he became a PE teacher at a local high school, a respectable job and a future he could call his own. Nicole had taken his quiet ambition and shaped it into something real. Yet sometimes, when she looked at him too closely, she wondered whether gratitude and dependence were quietly becoming the same thing. Their home became the epitome of comfort, love, and happiness. There was never a moment of want. Their cupboards were always full, the house warm and welcoming. They dined at fine restaurants, sipped rare wines, and wore the latest designer clothes. But behind the glow of prosperity lay an undeniable truth. Nicole paid for everything. Every luxury, every comfort, every forward step Leroy took had been paved by her. Still, as an old Jamaican proverb warns, a thick blanket causes a man to sleep late. "Leroy, dinner is ready," Nicole called out from the kitchen, her voice bright with excitement as the aroma of steamed fish and seasoned rice filled the house. "I'll be there in a minute, babes," he answered from the living room, his voice calm, unhurried. Nicole smiled, but a quiet thought stirred in the back of her mind, a thought she quickly brushed aside. For now, everything seemed perfect. And perhaps that was the danger of it. The most painful betrayals rarely arrive wearing ugly faces. Nicole tended to the home with quiet grace, taking care of every detail as though maintaining a delicate garden. The house was always spotless, the scent of fresh linen and polished wood lingering in the air. She cooked most of the meals, wholesome, delicious dishes that filled the kitchen with warmth and comfort. Leroy's clothes were immaculately pressed, his shirts crisp, his shoes shining. But her care for him went far beyond the domestic. Nicole lavished Leroy with love, kindness, and unwavering respect. In their private moments, her passion for him never dimmed. No matter how tired she felt after a long day at the office, she never denied him the intimacy he craved. Her body was his refuge, her affection a river that ran deep and generous, always welcoming him to delight in her pool of pleasure. She was, by every measure, a graceful and virtuous wife, patient, loyal, and devoted to her wifely duty. No complaint crossed her lips. Her commitment to their marriage was steadfast. But as the seasons turned, a dark cloud began to gather on the horizon. A year later, Nicole's seemingly perfect life was struck by an unexpected blow. An internal audit uncovered irregularities and fraudulent activities within the local branch of the building society she managed. Though she had nothing to do with the crime, her position as manager made her the prime suspect. The protocol demanded immediate action. She was suspended from duty pending investigation, and her personal bank accounts were frozen. Staring at the official letter in disbelief, her hands trembled. Her reputation, her spotless, carefully built career, was now under suspicion, but it wasn't guilt that twisted in her chest. It was an insult, deep, searing insult. She knew she was innocent. She had always worked with absolute integrity. Her first instinct was to call Leroy. When he picked up, her voice was steady, but tight with emotion. "Leroy, I have some news. There's been an audit at work. They say they found fraudulent transactions at my branch, and I've been suspended. My accounts are frozen. Until the investigation's over, I have nothing coming in." For a moment, silence hung heavy on the line. Nicole swallowed hard. her pride wounded not by the suspicion of the company, but by the shame of having to confess this to her husband. A woman who had carried their life, their comfort, their dreams, is now suddenly unable to provide. I swear, Leroy, I've done nothing wrong. I've always been honest. But they have to investigate. They have to follow procedure. In that quiet moment, she hoped for reassurance, for the strong, steady words of the man she had lifted, clothed, fed, and built into success. "My class starts in a minute," Leroy said, his voice carrying an unusual edge. Distant, distracted, not quite the comfort Nicole had hoped for. "When I get home, we'll talk. But don't worry, I've got your back." That afternoon, Leroy came home earlier than expected. Nicole sat hunched on the sofa, her shoulders low, her face fixed with defeat and shame. The weight of the day, the shock, the suspicion, the sting to her honor, pressed heavily on her. Leroy crossed the room and gently pulled her into his arms, holding her close. His embrace was warm, his voice soft with pity. "Babes, don't stress too much," he murmured. "I know you're innocent. In the end, this investigation will clear your name. Justice will prevail. You'll see." Nicole let out a long breath, her head resting against his chest. But the ache in her heart remained. "My intelligence, probity, and unimpeachable character earned me that position," she said softly, her voice heavy with wounded pride. "I've built everything through hard work and honesty. And now, suspended for alleged fraud." Her throat tightened. To make matters worse, the court has frozen my accounts, as if I'm some common criminal who needs to be stopped from stealing more. Leroy gently stroked her shoulder. "Babes, I understand your pain," he said with careful patience. "But these are just procedures, nothing more. Formalities they have to follow. You'll be proven innocent in the end." He pulled back slightly, looking into her eyes. "And don't you worry. I'll always be here for you. I'll never turn my back on you. I've got your back. You won't have to worry about money or anything else while this blows over. I promise you that." As the adage warns, promise is a comfort to a fool. Nicole found comfort in Leroy's reassuring words that day. For the first time in months, a sense of peace settled in her chest. "This is what I've always wanted," she mused quietly, a husband by her side carrying the weight with her. Maybe now was the time to truly settle into domestic life, to embrace her role as a wife in full and even start the family she'd long dreamed of. Leroy was stepping up. In those first few months, he paid the mortgage, the council tax, the grocery bills, the utilities, all the things Nicole had managed alone for so long. He did it without complaint, and their shared hope for a child drew them even closer. They started trying for a baby, filling their evenings with quiet tenderness and whispered dreams of a nursery, of small feet running through the house. But by the third month, something began to shift. Unspoken calculations started to cloud Leroy's mind. The figures crept into his thoughts. Mortgage, bills, food, petrol, her small personal expenses. Week by week, the total seemed to rise. The weight of providing, of holding the financial reins alone, pressed on him. His pride, once soothed by Nicole's generosity, now felt the burden of expectation. What once felt like privilege now felt in his mind like pressure. The same hands that had lifted him now reminded him of how far beneath her he had once stood. At first, the tension was quiet, a sigh here, a long pause there, but it grew steadily, feeding a slow resentment he dared not voice. Until one Friday evening, Leroy came home later than usual. Nicole, dressed in her soft cream dressing gown, was waiting expectantly. As was their tradition, they would dine out that night and escape from the house, from worry. "Good evening, my beloved husband," she greeted warmly, her smile bright in the dim hallway light. Leroy kicked off his shoes with force and dropped his bag heavily on the floor. His face was shadowed. "What made your evening so good?" he snapped suddenly. "Forget it. I'm not going out for dinner tonight." Nicole froze, caught off guard by the sharpness in his tone, so unlike the Leroy she knew. Confused, she stepped closer. "Is everything okay?" she asked gently. He turned to her, bitterness simmering behind his eyes. "Things would be better," he growled, "if someone in this house went out and found a job." The words cut like a blade. Nicole stood speechless, stunned as if the floor beneath her had shifted. After all her sacrifice, her faith, her labor in building his future. This. She swallowed hard, staring at the man she had once saved, wondering now what she had truly brought into her home. The old proverb whispered coldly, "Sorry for the mangy dog. He turned around and bit you." As the days slipped by, the cracks in Leroy's charm grew wider. The burden of being the sole provider seemed to weigh heavily on him, and with it came a slow but steady erosion of his warmth. His words turned sharp. His manner grew cold. Where once there had been laughter and gentleness, now there were signs of irritation, dismissive glances, and biting, passive-aggressive remarks that stung like unseen thorns. Nicole felt the shift like a chill creeping through the walls of their home. One morning, just as Leroy was about to leave for work, she hesitated at the kitchen door. Nerves fluttered in her chest, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "Leroy, can I please have some money for food shopping?" she asked softly, a polite request wrapped in quiet apprehension. He spun around abruptly, his face hardening. His voice rose, sharp and unkind. "Food shopping again?" he barked. "What do you do all day while I'm out working, huh? Sit here, eating away the money I make? Money doesn't grow on trees, Nicole." Without waiting for an answer, he grabbed his bag and slammed the door behind him, the sound echoing like thunder in the still house. Nicole gasped, her hand rising instinctively to her chest as her heart jumped in fright. Her eyes blinked in disbelief. This was the man she had clothed, fed, and built into success, the man for whom she had sacrificed so much. She felt as if a veil had lifted. Once she had looked at him with admiration, seeing only promise and potential. Now that he had climbed to comfort and security, his true nature was showing. Small, selfish, ungrateful. As the old proverb wisely said, "The more the monkey climbs, the more it is exposed." Nicole stood alone in the quiet kitchen, her heart breaking not from the loss of money or status, but from the fading image of the man she thought she had married. The man who once gazed at Nicole with affection and spoke to her with gentleness now looked at her with cold indifference, as if she were nothing more than a burden, a weight dragging down his wallet, his patience, his pride. It struck her suddenly, bitterly. This was beneath her. Beneath the woman she had always been independent, capable, and accomplished. A woman who once ran an entire branch of a respected building society. How had she allowed herself to become dependent on a man who no longer saw her worth? The very next day, with determination burning in her chest, Nicole dressed smartly and set out to find work. She pounded the pavements, submitted applications, and visited agencies, determined to stand on her own feet once again. But the search was in vain. Doors that once opened easily now stayed shut. Managers smiled politely and shook their heads. Suspicion from the unresolved investigation lingered like a shadow over her reputation. She returned home late that evening, tired and disheartened. Leroy sat sprawled on the sofa, his arms crossed, eyes dark and fixed on her as she entered. "Where were you?" he barked harshly. "I came home to an empty house, no dinner, nothing prepared. What the hell do you think you're doing?" Nicole stiffened, shocked by the harshness in his voice. I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I spent the whole day out looking for a job." Leroy sneered, his lip curled in contempt. "You're a foolish woman," he spat. "Who's going to hire you? You're unemployable right now. Just accept it and get on with your house duties. Now, hurry up and fix something for me to eat." His voice cracked like a whip across the room. Nicole stood frozen for a moment, stunned by the aggression and the ugliness that now lay bare in her husband. He had never spoken to her this way before. Not when he needed her. Not when she was the one paying the bills. Slowly, carefully, she composed herself, drawing up the quiet dignity that he had tried to strip from her. "I would appreciate it," she said, her voice low but firm, "if you speak to me with respect. There is no need to address me so aggressively." Leroy huffed, waving her off like an annoying fly. "Whatever," he muttered, turning back to the television. Dismayed but calm, Nicole walked into the kitchen and began preparing dinner, her mind turning over bitter thoughts. The days of civility, of shared respect, were gone. Now, every word he threw at her was barbed, every glance full of disdain. Sometimes the silence between them felt louder than arguments. Two people could share the same house and still live worlds apart. When she spoke, his response was ridicule. When she moved, his answer was a complaint. In those quiet moments between chopping vegetables and stirring pots, the truth settled on her chest like a heavy stone. Nicole remembered her mother's whispered warnings. "Be careful who you give your heart, your trust, and your sacrifices to. Some people know how to wear the face of love for as long as they are receiving, but the moment it is time to give, they vanish." Back then, Nicole had dismissed her mother's warnings with the stubborn confidence of a woman in love. Not Leroy, she had insisted. He's different. But now, the mask had fallen, and her mother's words came back to her with painful clarity. Hard of hearing or stubborn children will eat rockstone. One evening, Leroy came through the front door, his steps heavy, his face darkened by displeasure. He paused in the doorway, eyes narrowing as he caught sight of Nicole sitting quietly on the sofa, watching television. A flash of disdain crossed his face. "I'm tired of this," he snapped suddenly. "Tired of coming home from work, carrying this whole house on my back, while you sit here doing nothing, just watching TV. This investigation of yours has dragged on far too long. You need to get off your backside and go back to work." Nicole turned her startled eyes towards him, the calm in her gaze belying the ache in her heart. She rose slowly from the sofa, standing tall though her spirit felt battered. "Leroy," she said softly, her voice clear but steady, "have you so quickly forgotten all that I have done for you? Without a murmur, without complaint. Why is it now such a burden for you to fulfill what every husband should willingly do for his wife? Have you forgotten that I did all this and more for years without fuss or resentment?" Her quiet truth landed between them like a stone. But Leroy only scowled, his pride pricked by the reminder. He exploded into a tirade, a stream of cruel, expletive words that filled the room with venom. Nicole lowered her head, her heart sinking, not in guilt or shame, but in trepidation. This was not the man she had loved, nor the husband she had built a life around. His mask had slipped entirely. In the days that followed, Nicole fell silent. She no longer pleaded, no longer explained. She drifted into stillness, her words few, her emotions guarded. But her silence was not weakness. It was thought. It was depth. It was the quiet before a storm. As the old proverb wisely says, "A silent river runs deep." Nicole had married Leroy for love, a pure, wholehearted love that had made her blind to warnings, deaf to doubts. But now the truth was painfully clear. He had married her not for love, but for opportunity. The warmth that once filled their home had turned cold, its light slowly snuffed out by indifference. When Leroy came home, if he came home at all, he no longer greeted her with affection or even courtesy. Instead, she was met with a blank stare, a cold shoulder, and a dismissive grunt. "A cow never knows the use of its tail until it loses it," the old proverb whispered bitterly. Shame wrapped itself around her like a cloak. She could not bear to share her ordeal with family or friends. What would she say? That the man she had spent so much to uplift, to love, to build a life with, had turned into a stranger. Worse, into a betrayer. She kept her sorrow locked behind closed doors, imprisoned by loneliness and silent despair. Night after night, she wept in secret, pouring out her broken heart to God in whispered prayers, asking why love had deceived her so cruelly. Leroy began to stay out late, first coming home after midnight, then not at all. Some nights, he disappeared completely, offering no word of explanation. His phone rang unanswered, his text messages unread. Nicole's suspicions hardened into certainty. This was the man who had once begged her to marry him, pleaded for a visa, sworn that he couldn't bear a single day or night without her warmth and companionship. And now he treated her as if she were nothing, forgotten, discarded. The home she had so carefully and lovingly built, the mortgage she paid, the furniture she chose, the life she dreamt of, had crumbled into an empty shell. And Leroy, he had simply moved on. Whispers began to reach Nicole's ears, and then, as painful truths often do, the full story revealed itself. Leroy had found another woman, a younger, attractive maths teacher from his school, one who made him feel admired, desired, and important. She treated him like a king, exactly the kind of worship a man like Leroy had always craved. She gave him attention, excitement, and admiration, all the things he had once pretended to value in Nicole when he still needed her money, support, and sacrifice. Nicole did not scream when she heard. Somehow, the truth hurt less than the humiliation of realizing everyone else had seen it coming before she did. Before long, Leroy began to sleep out for days, then weeks, before vanishing altogether. The bills he once grudgingly paid now piled up unpaid. The house grew cold, dark, and empty. Nicole sat alone, night after night, staring at the phone, wondering if he would call, or hoping that he wouldn't. The old proverb rang sharp. The same knife that sticks sheep also sticks goat. One evening, overwhelmed by desperation and loneliness, Nicole mustered the courage to call Leroy. When he answered, his voice came through sharp and cold. "Hello," he said curtly, almost without interest. "Leroy," she whispered, her voice trembling with pain. Please come home." But his response was like a slap. Fury cracked through the line. "Come home to what?" he spat. "A jobless, broke woman who can't even give me a child? Listen carefully. I want children. I have no time to waste with a barren wife," he shouted before slamming down the phone. Nicole's breath caught in her throat. The words echoed in her mind. Brutal and final. The proverb rang painfully. "Before you finish crossing the river, don't wash away your stick." Crushed beyond words, Nicole collapsed onto the sofa, tears streaming down her face in a raw, helpless, sobbing heap. Days later, she caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. The sadness in her eyes looked older than her years. As the days turned into weeks, the cold truth slowly settled deep inside her. She had lost someone who never truly cared, but within the depths of her pain, a quiet resolve began to grow. She started taking small but steady, practical steps to rebuild her life and master the storm of emotions raging within her. Therapy, exercise, reconnecting with old friends, applying for jobs, nurturing her passions, each day became a brick in the foundation of a new self. Healing did not come all at once. Some mornings, she still woke with grief sitting heavily on her chest. But slowly, the grief stopped controlling the shape of her days. With time, Nicole discovered an unshakable confidence blossoming inside her, a clarity of purpose and a calm inner peace she never knew she possessed. She learned that strength often comes not in triumph, but in surviving the darkest moments. As the proverb says, you never know yourself until your back is against the wall. This was more than just a turning point. It was a spiritual awakening. Nicole's deeper understanding of herself, her infinite wisdom and newfound clarity were gifts born from hardship. But such profound self-realization came at a high price. Both her body and soul had borne the scars of betrayal, loneliness, and despair. Sometimes you have to pay to learn, the proverb whispered, reminding that growth often demands sacrifice. One quiet morning, after a session of meditation that brought her peace, her phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm and authoritative. It was the CEO of the bank. "Mrs. Nicole Jones," he began politely. "I'm calling to apologize on behalf of the company. We sincerely regret the distress our investigation has caused you. After months of thorough review, we've identified the true culprit. You may resume your position immediately. Your accounts have been unfrozen, and all withheld wages and compensation will be paid in full." Relief flooded Nicole like a warm tide. For a moment, she simply breathed it in, grateful and serene. For months, she had carried shame that never belonged to her. Now, at last, she could finally put it down. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady and composed. The nightmare that had exposed her husband's true nature was finally behind her. That morning, dressed sharply and confidently, Nicole stepped back into her career, ready to reclaim her life. With her path cleared, she filed for divorce, an act of courage and closure. Within the year, reluctantly but open-heartedly, she began a courtship with Joseph, a successful property tycoon. After months of his relentless, respectful pursuit, Nicole gave him a chance he embraced with genuine warmth. Joseph was a true gentleman, showering her with love, respect, and the comforts of a life she deserved. What touched Nicole most was not his wealth, but his gentleness. Joseph never made her feel small for surviving pain. For Leroy, everything seemed perfect on the surface. But beneath the calm, a storm was quietly gathering strength. When you think it's peace and safety, it's sudden destruction. Soon, Leroy's life took a harsh and unrelenting turn for the worse. As the proverb warns, "So you spread your bed, you must lie in it." After nearly 2 years of trying unsuccessfully to conceive, his girlfriend insisted they see a fertility specialist. The diagnosis was a blow. Leroy suffered from oligospermia, a low sperm count that no amount of treatment could fix. His girlfriend's patience wore thin. Frustrated and bitter, she ended their relationship, kicking him out of her home. To make matters worse, she filed an injunction against him, accusing him of harassment and threatening behavior. With his personal life in tatters, Leroy soon lost his job, dismissed due to his increasingly erratic behavior and the mounting accusations against him. From that point, his world spiraled downward, a stark contrast to the life Nicole had rebuilt without him. Desperate, Leroy tried to reach out to the one person he knew had once loved him truly and deeply. But Nicole had moved on. She was happily married to Joseph, a man who cherished and respected her. And more than that, Nicole was now expecting their first child, a new chapter full of hope and promise. Leroy had mistaken kindness for weakness and loyalty for something endless. By the time he understood Nicole's worth, she was already gone. Some losses arrive quietly, not with noise or violence, but with the slow realization that the person who once loved you no longer does. And as the old Jamaican proverb warns, never bite the hand that feeds you. If you enjoyed this story, don't just like, subscribe, and comment. Share it. That's how Word, Sound, and Story by Troy Mackenzie reaches further and grows stronger. Thank you for your support.